On my 30th birthday, I walked into my parents' living room and saw a suitcase, silver, old, the same one I had given my father 3 years ago for his trip to Dallas, sitting upright on the worn-out carpet, zipped, centered, alone. Taped on top was a note, printed in all caps with my mother's narrow handwriting. "Your time here is up." There was no cake, no dinner, no candles, no happy birthday. Just a suitcase and silence. I hadn't even put down my purse yet. The only sound came from the television, playing some financial news segment with scrolling tickers and muted arguments. My father, Frank, was in his recliner, staring at the screen like it had raised him since birth. He didn't flinch when I walked in. He didn't speak until I stood directly between him and the glowing TV. "You're 30 now," he said, voice dry and flat, like dust scraping across wood. "Nobody freeloads forever. Move out tomorrow." I turned slowly. My mother, Darlene, sat on the edge of the couch, both hands wrapped around a cold mug of tea. She wasn't watching the TV or me. She stared somewhere behind me, eyes fixed in midair, as if someone had whispered her role and she was sticking to the script. She didn't nod. She didn't cry. She didn't say, "This isn't how we do things in this family." No, she just sat there, letting my father's sentence stand alone, unquestioned. It wasn't the kind of betrayal that arrives with shouting and slammed doors. It was quieter, sharper, the kind that tells you, "You were never safe here to begin with." I looked at the suitcase, and suddenly I remembered the last time it had been used. 3 years ago, my father had a heart scan in Dallas. I had spent an entire weekend helping him pack, making a list of everything he'd need. Toothbrush, medication, extra socks. I bought that suitcase on my own dime, wrapping it with a red bow because he said his old one was too small. He never said thank you. He just told me it rolled unevenly. Now here it was again, returned to me, as a message, as a boundary, as a final receipt. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stood there, staring at the seams, breathing slowly like I was afraid even my lungs might offend them. I looked down and realized I was still holding the grocery bag from earlier. Inside it, a tiny vanilla cake with crooked red icing that read, "Happy Birthday," in the world's laziest cursive. I had bought it on sale at the gas station bakery. No one was supposed to see it. I had picked it up just to feel less alone, less forgettable. But now, standing in that room full of nothing but cold air and turned backs, I realized I wasn't forgotten. I was deliberately erased. I placed the cake gently on the kitchen counter and backed away, like it was too fragile to touch or too honest to bear. Frank didn't look up again. My mother didn't speak. I knew in that moment this wasn't impulsive. They didn't just wake up and decide today was the day. No, this had been planned, calculated, executed like a quiet little eviction timed for maximum sting. Because they wanted me gone. But not just gone. They wanted me gone on my birthday. That was the point. It wasn't enough to dismiss me. They had to mark it, to let me know that even the day I was born, even that belonged to them and could be used against me. I stood there for one last moment, no longer waiting for someone to speak, just watching my own reflection in the darkened TV screen, flickering between market charts and weather alerts, and then I walked upstairs, quietly, slowly, as if leaving too loudly would be rude. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was sad, not even because I was angry, but because something deeper had snapped, something that had been stretched too thin for too many years. It was the moment I realized my love had become their habit, and habits don't say thank you. They expect you to stay. 8 years. That's how long I had been paying for that house to function, quietly, faithfully, without question. 8 years of watching my 20s dissolve into receipts, balances, and bank transfers with no room left for doubt, only duty. I moved back in with my parents at 22, right after finishing my accounting degree. Not because I didn't have options. I had job offers, chances to start fresh in other cities. But my mother had called me 2 weeks before graduation. "Your dad's knee is flaring up again. The water bill's overdue. We just need a little help getting back on track. Just a little help. That's how it started. I told myself it was temporary. I even wrote it on a sticky note and stuck it above my desk. 6 months. Save up. Move out. I found my first job within days. Entry-level tax assistant at a local firm. I worked 10-hour shifts during tax season. Came home to dishes in the sink and a house that somehow always needed repairs. And I paid. I paid because I thought that's what grown daughters did. The electric bill? In my name. The water? Me. Internet? Me. Dad's new heart medication that insurance didn't cover? $112 a month on my card. Every oil change, tire replacement, brake fix on Mom's aging Camry? Mine. One winter, the furnace broke down in the middle of a snowstorm. My father said we could tough it out for a few days. I used my year-end bonus to call the repairman within 24 hours. My mom didn't thank me. She just said, "Well, you're the one who works full-time." They always had a reason why the bills fell on me. "You're single, no kids." "We're retired." "You're young, you'll bounce back." Every time I hesitated, my mother would look at me like I had slapped her. Family leans on each other, Madeline. What will happen when you're the one who needs help? But help, I learned, only flowed one direction in our house. My direction. Outward. I still remember the night I got my first promotion. Senior tax consultant. I brought home takeout to celebrate. Sushi. A little bottle of sparkling juice. When I walked in, Dad was yelling at the TV over a baseball game. Mom glanced up from her magazine and said, "Oh, that was today?" I ate alone in my room. I wasn't a daughter. I was a system, a quiet, reliable source of income that they could tap into without ever logging into a bank app. There were days I told myself maybe that was enough. Maybe being needed, even for the wrong reasons, was still a kind of love. But even that illusion cracked last winter. It was January. Springfield had been hit by an ice storm, one of the worst in years. The roads froze solid. Power lines collapsed. Most homes lost electricity. Ours didn't, because 6 months earlier, I had paid $3,200 to upgrade our electrical panel and install backup insulation. I had used the bonus I'd been saving for a trip to Seattle, my first real vacation. I never booked the flight. I spent it on heat for all of us. That night, as the city darkened outside, my father cracked open a beer, leaned back, and said, "Glad we prepped smart, huh?" We. I smiled faintly, said nothing, because I knew. He didn't even remember. Not the quote, not the repair, not the receipt I still kept in a folder marked Deferred Dreams. And I remember thinking, this is who they are, and this is what I've become. A ghost with a paycheck, a warm body whose warmth they took for granted. Still I stayed, until the night they gave me that suitcase and took away my last excuse for believing any of this was ever love. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cry either. There was nothing left inside me but stillness, cold, clear, and absolute. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, the one with the faded floral sheets and a cracked headboard that still creaked when I shifted my weight. The walls still held my college diploma in a wooden frame. A box of high school letters sat untouched in the corner closet. It felt like a museum curated by people who had just decided I didn't belong. At 1:12 a.m., I opened my laptop. The Wi-Fi network still said Darlene Loves Sunsets. Cute. I'd been paying for it since 2017. First, the electric and gas company. I logged in, canceled autopay, and removed my card. Then water and trash. Canceled. Then internet. Canceled. Then Netflix, which no one had ever asked to share, just assumed was theirs. Canceled. Then came car insurance. I had bundled my dad's truck and mom's Camry under my name for a multi-vehicle discount. Removed them both. Policy canceled. Then came the joint checking account. My mother had begged me to open it, just in case of emergencies. In reality, she used it like her private purse. I transferred every cent, $2, for 3.91, to the personal account I had quietly opened 3 months ago, when my gut first whispered that something was wrong. And then I pulled out the black leather notebook from my desk drawer, the one I'd once bought to track my CPA study schedule. That night, it became something else. I flipped to the first blank page and began writing, "Roof repair 2020 for $1,200. Dad's heart meds. 6 years x $112 equals $8,064. Utilities, electric, water, internet average $250 per month x 96 months equals $24,000. Car repairs for major services equals $3,800. House insurance 3 years equals $3,600. Untracked emergencies EST $5,000. Total $48,664. I looked at the number. I didn't feel anger, not even regret. I felt clean, like I had just emptied a closet full of moldy clothes I'd been guilt-tripped into wearing. Every cancel button I clicked, every line I wrote, it wasn't revenge. It was removal, a slow, methodical undoing of a life that had never actually been mine. At 6:10 a.m., I zipped up the very suitcase they had placed in the living room. I didn't pack everything, just enough. A few changes of clothes, my laptop, the notebook, a single photo of me at age 5, holding a stuffed bear on the front porch. Before I knew what love could be twisted into, I walked through the house once more. The lights in the hallway flickered, as always. Wires I'd suggested fixing last year, but Dad had said, "If it ain't burning, don't touch it." In the kitchen, the cake still sat on the counter. The frosting had dried, crusted at the edges, the words "Happy Birthday" sagging like a joke that had outlived its punchline. I didn't take it. Instead, I turned off the kitchen light, walked down the front steps with my backpack and that silver suitcase, and stepped into the October morning chill. No one said goodbye. No one stopped me. And I didn't leave a note. By 6:45 a.m., I was in Eliza Monroe's apartment on the east side of Springfield. She had left the spare key under the mat, just like old times in college. I didn't speak when I walked in, just nodded when she opened the door, still in pajamas, eyes wide with concern. She didn't ask questions. She handed me a blanket and made tea. I stepped into her bathroom and took a 30-minute shower. Hot, full pressure, the kind I never allowed myself at home because I was always calculating the utility bill. I stood there as the steam rose around me, and for the first time in a decade, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like a person. At exactly 8:13 a.m., my phone started vibrating like it had a pulse of its own. I let it ring, let it buzz itself into silence. Then it started again, and again. The first message was from my mother. "Maddie, the Wi-Fi's not working. Did you change the password? Also, the TV says no signal. Please call. I'm sure you didn't do this on purpose." 5 minutes later, a second. "Your father is furious. I'm trying to stay calm. You know he hates surprises. Please talk to us before this gets worse." Then the text snowballed, 6 more from her, 2 missed calls, 1 voicemail I didn't check. Then came a call from Aunt Lorna, who I hadn't spoken to in nearly a year. "Your mother's very upset, Maddie. No one knows what's going on, but this isn't the way to handle things. You can't just shut your parents out like this. They gave you everything." Everything. The heater I paid for, the groceries I bought, the repairs I funded. I stared at the phone and flipped it face down on Eliza's table. By 10:30 a.m., my father texted me, "You'll regret this. Family is forever." No comma, no punctuation, just a sentence dropped like a brick, like a verdict. I hovered over the block button. For a moment I was ready, but then I stopped myself. Not yet. Not because I was afraid. Not because I wanted to leave the door open, but because I needed to see it, all of it. just how far they'd go when they could no longer pull the strings quietly. And sure enough, they didn't disappoint. That afternoon, around 2:15 p.m., Eliza walked into the living room holding her phone. "Have you seen this?" I looked up. She handed me her screen. It was a Facebook post from a local group, Neighbors of East Springfield. My parents were members. They usually used it to share weather alerts and prayer requests. But today there was a photo of our house taken from the street. Windows dim, porch light off, and above it, a caption written like an obituary. "Some children are born ungrateful. After everything we gave her, our daughter has left us without power, without water, without compassion. Please pray for us during this time of hardship." The comments section exploded. Unbelievable. What kind of daughter does this? I know Frank. He's a good man. She must have been brainwashed. Kids these days are all entitled. I read each comment slowly, not because they surprised me, but because they didn't. This was the pattern. When private guilt no longer worked, they reached for public pity. When manipulation behind closed doors failed, they opened the front windows and screamed to the street. They weren't grieving parents. They were losing control, and they couldn't stand the silence. One woman, Mrs. Bernhard from down the block, commented, "I always wondered why I saw Madeline shoveling snow alone while Frank sat inside with a beer. Guess I know now." I stared at that comment longer than any of the others, not because it was dramatic, but because it was ordinary and true. And suddenly, the house I had once fought to keep warm in winter, to keep lit during storms, didn't feel like a home I'd lost. It felt like a trap I had finally escaped. That night, I didn't respond to anyone. Not the texts, not the calls, not even the guilt bombs dressed as family concern. I sat by Eliza's window, sipping lukewarm tea and watching the streetlights flicker on. And for the first time in years, I wasn't worried about who needed me. I wasn't worried about what I owed. I just listened to the quiet, the kind that doesn't ask anything of you, the kind that feels like peace. The envelope came on a Monday, October 23rd. The morning sky was crisp, brittle, like it might shatter if you looked at it too long. I was filling out a new job application in Eliza's kitchen when I heard the knock. The man on the porch wore a postal jacket, but it was the yellow envelope in his hand that made my stomach turn. He said my name, gently, almost apologetically. "Miss Carter, you've been served." I took it with both hands. My fingers didn't shake. Back inside, I sat down and opened it. 3 pages, dense legal language. At the top, Frank and Darlene Carter versus Madeline Carter. Allegations: financial abuse of dependent elders, neglect of parental care, unlawful seizure of shared assets. In plain English, theft, abandonment, betrayal. I read every line slowly, not because I was confused, but because it felt absurd, like watching someone accuse a firefighter of arson after she put out the flames with her own hands. The woman who covered medication bills for 6 years, now labeled an abuser. The daughter who worked overtime to save the house from foreclosure, now accused of theft. I set the papers down and stood up. No pacing, no ranting. I poured myself a glass of water, leaned on the counter, and took a breath. Then I picked up the phone and called the legal aid office in Topeka. The woman on the other end was calm and efficient. "Do you have documentation?" I laughed, soft, bitter. "I have more than enough." That same week, we filed a formal countersuit. Allegations: prolonged financial coercion, emotional exploitation disguised as familial duty, psychological manipulation tied to control of financial assets. I attached everything. Utility bills with my name on every page. Bank transfers dating back 8 years. Screenshots of texts and emails, my mother asking for money like it was an invoice. Voicemails where my father yelled when I delayed payments by a day. Receipts. Statements. Guilt dressed up as gratitude. There was no need to dramatize. The truth, laid bare, was already louder than anything they could scream on Facebook. On Friday, October 27th, at exactly 10:02 p.m., I posted it all publicly. No long caption, no emotional breakdown, just hard facts lined up like a spreadsheet. Photos of invoices, audio clips with clipped voices saying, "Just pay it, Maddie." A video of me climbing a ladder during last winter's ice storm to clear out the gutters while my father watched football. A saved email from Mom. "We're tight again this month. Can you move your rent payment to our account? It's just this once." Under the post, I pinned one line, 8 years, $48,664. I didn't leave. I was pushed. By Saturday morning, I had 300 new messages. People I barely remembered messaged me, former coworkers, neighbors, even someone from high school. They had seen the post. They were stunned. Mrs. Langley, the neighbor 2 doors down, commented, "I once saw Madeline fixing the porch light at 10 p.m. while Frank sat inside drinking. I thought maybe she was just helpful. I was wrong." Another woman wrote, "I remember Darlene bragging that they never had to worry about bills since their daughter moved home. I thought she meant they were frugal. I get it now." And then it shifted, the narrative, from cold daughter to used daughter, from selfish millennial to silent workhorse, finally done. Public sympathy doesn't undo damage. It doesn't heal the years, but it cracked the mask they wore. And for once, I didn't have to say a word. The truth was doing just fine on its own. The courthouse smelled like lemon floor wax and old paper. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, washing the world in pale blue shadows. Room 2C, 9 a.m., Friday, October 27th, the same day my post had gone viral. I wore a plain navy blazer, hair pulled back, no makeup, not out of fear or submission, but because this wasn't a performance. This was closure. My attorney, Mrs. Dalton, a petite woman in her 60s with steel-colored hair and sharper eyes, flipped through our folder as if confirming a math equation. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. When Frank and Darlene walked in, I felt nothing. Not pain, not rage, just that quiet blankness that follows when you've already buried something. My father sat down heavily, jaw tight, lips pursed like he was chewing on pride. My mother looked smaller than usual, her cardigan sleeves bunched in her fists, like they might hold her together. Their attorney was a man who looked like a history teacher. Gray suit, glasses halfway down his nose. He opened their file, read a few lines, then turned slowly to them. He spoke low, but I could still hear it. "We don't want this to make the papers." He closed the folder. That was it. No court battle, no gavel slam, no dramatic testimony. They dropped the case. It happened so fast. The judge barely had time to blink. Papers shuffled. Chairs scraped. The hearing ended before it ever began. Frank stood up. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at me. He slammed his palm flat on the table, not hard enough to break anything, but enough to make my water bottle rattle, and hissed under his breath, "I can't believe my own daughter would turn her back like this." Then he stormed out, heavy boots echoing down the marble hallway. He didn't wait for my mother, didn't hold the door. Darlene didn't move right away. She stayed seated, eyes lowered, hands still twisted in her sleeves. And then, just above a whisper, barely louder than breath, she said, "I didn't know it would come to this." I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words, but because none of them would have mattered. Not to her. Not now. I stood, packed my folder back into my bag, nodded politely to my lawyer, and walked out. No hugs. No, I'm sorry. No redemption arc. Only distance. As I stepped into the morning light, the sun hit me full in the face. Sharp. Unapologetic. I blinked, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel tired. I wasn't celebrating. There were no balloons, no parade, no sense of winning. But I was no longer losing. That was enough. The truth had spoken. They had listened, too late, too little, and walked away without a single word of accountability. That wasn't justice. It wasn't revenge. But it was something closer to peace. I had stood up. I had spoken plainly. I had walked through the storm they built and came out dry. And that would have to be enough. My new apartment wasn't much. 450 square feet on the third floor of a brick building near downtown Springfield. The hardwood floors creaked like stage actors. The windows moaned when opened. The heater had to be knocked twice before it would cough to life. But to me, it was perfect. I furnished it with flea market finds and furniture that no one else wanted. A chipped dining table, a sunken armchair with a burn mark the shape of Texas, a coffee mug that read, "World's okayest accountant." The rug was an ambiguous shade of gray that the landlady called vintage. I called it survived. I painted the walls myself. Pale blue, not to erase the past, but to mark where something else had begun. I chose a shade that reminded me of sky on a cold morning. Sharp, honest, unpretentious. Every night I lit a $2 candle and sat by the window with a mug of tea, listening to the world outside without the weight of it pressing on my chest. No one called my name from another room. No one banged on the door asking for a password or a payment. No one asked where I'd been or why I hadn't covered something. It was quiet, not lonely, just still. A week after the court hearing, I received another message from my mother. "We're still your parents, Maddie. I hope you don't forget that." I didn't respond. What was there to say? That I hadn't forgotten? That every time I passed a certain brand of cereal or heard the creak of a recliner, I still thought of them? That I still caught myself calculating if I could afford to help out, even though there was no longer anyone asking? No. Some silences are sacred. Some distances are not punishments, they're oxygen. A few days later, I unpacked the last box. Inside it, buried beneath old paperwork and a cracked photo frame, was the plastic cake topper from the night they threw me out. It still had a bit of dried white frosting clinging to the base. The words "Happy Birthday" were faded, the red letters warped by time and heat. I almost tossed it, but instead, I placed it on the kitchen shelf, not as a wound, not as a bitter symbol, but as a reminder. That night, in the house I used to pay for, I had brought that cake home like a peace offering to people who had never known how to hold peace. Now it sat in my home, my real one, not because I needed to forgive them, but because I needed to remember the moment I stopped asking to be kept. They had always said, "Who will take care of us when we're old?" I used to think the answer was me. Now I know the cost of that answer was my entire life, and I wasn't willing to pay it anymore. It's strange how peace doesn't arrive with trumpets or applause. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps in slowly, like light under a door you thought had been sealed shut. One morning, I woke up and realized something had changed. I wasn't bracing anymore, not waiting for the phone to buzz with accusations or needs disguised as affection, not listening for footsteps in the hallway or voices calling my name, expecting something, money, attention, forgiveness. The silence had settled in, not empty, just clean. I still had bills, still had work stress, still had nights where I lay awake wondering how much of me had been shaped by their taking, and how long it would take to find the parts that were mine. But I wasn't theirs anymore, and they knew it. My father never reached out again. My mother tried twice. Once with a card on Thanksgiving, "We're still family." Once on Christmas, "This isn't what your grandparents would have wanted." I opened neither. I didn't block them. I didn't post a rant. I didn't scream or expose. I just stopped showing up, because sometimes the loudest thing you can do is leave the space they used to fill completely silent. There were moments I wondered what would happen if I had stayed, if I had paid one more bill, covered one more lie, let one more guilt trip pass unchecked. I would have been 40, then 50, still on the hook for their comfort while erasing my own. I know now that walking away wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rebellious. It wasn't even cruel. It was necessary. Some people survive their childhoods with scars. Some survive their families with receipts. I survived with both. People ask me now if I've forgiven them. I never know how to answer. Forgiveness implies there's a debt to wipe clean. But how do you forgive people who never admitted there was a debt to begin with? People who took without thanks, expected without pause, and turned you into the villain when you finally said enough. I'm not angry. Not anymore. Because anger would mean I'm still tangled with them, still letting their absence burn holes through my peace. I'm not tangled. I'm not burning. I'm just done. And being done is a beautiful thing. Last week, I found a photo of myself from college, 22 years old, holding a diploma in one hand and car keys in the other. I looked tired even then, like someone who already knew how heavy the next few years would be. I placed the photo on my new shelf, beside a tiny ceramic fox I bought at a thrift store. It looks ridiculous. I love it. No one else gets to decorate this life anymore. Just me. And maybe that's not a grand victory. Maybe I didn't win anything, but I didn't break. I didn't become them. I didn't pass the damage forward. And if that's not enough for the world to clap, that's fine. Because for the first time in 30 years, I know what it feels like to breathe without permission. And I won't forget it. They didn't lose a daughter. They spent her until she stopped giving. I didn't walk away to win. I walked away to live.